Well, today I'm doing a little bit of rearranging, and a couple of these mining rigs have pretty weak sauce CPUs. So what I'm going to be doing is upgrading several of them, really. I might not touch the X12. That's got a 4400 in it, a Pentium G 4400, so that's actually kind of okay. I believe that's still just a 2-core, 2-thread, but it's a little bit spicier than a 3930. The Octominer X8 is a Haswell gen, and that does need an upgrade, but I don't know if it's worth putting in an i7 or an i5. The VTRETU is a B75, and it's got a Pentium G 645 in it and 4 gigs of RAM, so I need to upgrade that. And then I've also got this other one, which is completely no name, no brand, I don't know, but just switching around some cards in here. And this also has 4 gigs of RAM and a really garbage dual core. So I have a Xeon 26, what is it? 1260L. So the low power Xeon that fits in these. Just to make it a little easier on myself, I'm gonna pull the power supply off to the side and we'll get that replaced and the RAM as well. All right, so let's go ahead and get this little Intel cooler off. Get those popped out. So as is the case with all these cheapo rigs, you do have to bend this just a little bit, but it will come out. Now I gotta really carefully get this out without bending pins. But yeah, that's what we're working with in there. All right, here we have that yicky, sticky, terrible old Pentium or whatever. I can't read any of that, but gross. And there we have our new hotness, the Xeon. Now let's put the cooler back on and swap out that RAM. Oh, no label on that. Put in some name brand stuff. All right, that one's done. I'm gonna put the lid on it and I don't know. And clearly I have not done the resistor mod to that power supply because it's nice and loud, but we can see CPU is registering 8 gigs of RAM. Just gotta make sure I pop a flight sheet on that since I took out the Radeon 7s. And we can move on to the simp. Well, I spared you getting to this point in the VTRETU. I've actually already worked on this one because I did the resistor mod in this power supply. But yeah, this one's a little bit different. It's got the Cooler Master style cooler, so it's got 4 screws, and I do want to put a piece of cardboard behind this first. It does have a back plate that will fall off, and that makes the job just a ton harder. So I need to put that in first, then I'll undo these guys. I'll swap out the RAM, and the cards are staying the same in this. The 8 CMP50HXs are staying. Okay. Oh, goodness. Oh, no, that's a one-handed job, but just barely. Oh my God, the force. All right, good. You can see the back plate still in place with all that cardboard back there. Now I just gotta put some paste on there. This is great television, isn't it? That should do. And let's reapply this here heatsink and fan. Yeah, buddy. Well, VTRETU wins this one. They actually at least labeled the RAM, but at least the slot's in the right spot. It is a little tricky to get to. The RAM you could do without pulling the power supply, but there you go. Let's throw the PSU back in, and this one is ready to go. This is why I always save those little sachets of thermal paste from those shipments of Xeon CPUs and things like that. So wait for it to boot, double check our power wattage at the wall, And then I'll probably do the Octaminers at a later date, because those are still working okay. I don't know. Once again, we can see 1260L and 8 gigs of RAM. So now I can add some CPU mining to these bad boys as well. Well, after last week's hardware score, I decided to show one of my rigs, one of the old faithfuls, a little bit of love. This is BarDNA 2. This is my secondary all AMD RX 6000 rig. My primary is over here. There's a cat there. But this rig, although it is very reliable, occasionally it will come up with just 11 cards, not 12, and I need to soft reboot it. It's done that enough where at this point I actually have a Hive schedule for this rig to reboot at 9:04 p.m. when it boots at 9 p.m. So a lot of that I think has to do with, once again, this is my other main rig with one of these B75 12 GPU motherboards, and occasionally they just aren't quite as stable. So in addition to swapping that out, what I'm going to do first is get rid of this EVGA Supernova 1000G+. This power supply I bought during the pandemic, and I got a screaming deal on it at the time. It has served me very well, and it has powered 6 and 8 GPU mining rigs on its own through some hellacious conditions for the last couple of years. So it's still doing great. Still very efficient, like it barely produces any heat, but it is a gold power supply, and I'm running it a little bit above 50% of its power handling capability, actually quite a bit above. I've waited for the rig to get fully up to temperature just to get a before image. I do also have a before image of the Titanium 750 secondary, but that's not going to be as relevant because I am only changing out the primary power supply to start with. So I'm going to swap it out for a 1200 P2 Supernova, and since these are both Supernova series power supplies, I can use the same peripheral cables. So this should really just mean cutting some zip ties that I have very skillfully holding the PSU in place and swapping in the 1200. So I'm going to shut her down right now, and I'm going to swap out the power supply. Well, worth doing, certainly, but wow, I gotta say, going from the gold to the platinum, and I think it's just because the gold is so good, not because the platinum is so bad, but we only saved 5 watts, and this thing's right in its butter zone. It's only pulling 711 watts out of a 1200 watt budget on 240 volt. So honestly, that 1000 watt is a very impressive PSU. Now that I know that's all working just fine, I am going to go ahead and power this down. I'm going to look at my own port map that I had from last week's video, label all these. I do have them labeled, but I think there's some issue because I have 2 4s. So, not sure which one's correct. So I'm going to shut it down, label all the cords, and then I'm going to hook up one of those B250 boards, and I know I have the layout for that too. And yeah, we'll get it installed and choochin'. Got my cheat sheet, got some RAM, got a B250 board with a CPU in it, I've got a really nasty CPU cooler with a fan that's already failing, and we've got the old B75 standby. Great, great boards. This one served me well. It's got a little spider nest in there, it looks like. These still have their upside. I mean, if you want to power them with a server power supply and you want for sure to have MSATA, look no further. But I'm going to go ahead and transfer this whole chestnut, like you saw last week, over to the B250 board. And I don't know what the heck's going on here. That must have fallen off some other card. But let me transfer that over to the B250. We'll get that installed. And yeah. Oh man, my old gaming desktop memory. So cool. Bought that for my Phenom 2 back in the day. Alright, we've got a dab of thermal paste. I will say, not all of these brackets are created equally. The one that came with this RGB bob is way better than the one last week. They've got these little offshoots to the side that gives you some leverage. It's an ingenious solution. 4560T, so 2-core 4-thread. I think it's a 6th. It might actually, no, that's a 7th gen chip. But these are like 35 watts, 4 threads, like I said. 16 gigs of brand new RAM. It's 2400, but good enough for a mining rig. This is overkill for the record. I really don't think you need more than 8 gigs. But yeah, here's our B250 12P. Let me slap the cooler on it real quick. And then I'll have to sneak the power switch in, which is dangling right down there. And then we will get going with the actual GPUs and fastening it in. All right, the cheat sheet for the B250. Now we see if she boots. I suppose Ethernet would be good, huh? Oh man, that's a tight fit. Wow, that's really got some tension. So I'm fighting some instability, but I think it might be because of this. It's a newer 8 capacitor riser, but just doesn't seem like it was that well made. S plus, yeah, I don't know, man. I swapped it out with one of these Hypno Toad Blinky Boys. Let's see. Well, it does fluctuate a little bit, but at best we're maybe looking at a 2-watt difference between the B75 and the Pentium versus the B250 and, well, it's also a Pentium, I guess. But we've doubled the CPU hash rate, and it comes up just fine in Hive. The riser was the issue. It comes up just fine in Hive every time since then. So I'm going to now practice and see if these work with the wake alarm command. And if I'm going to try it on this rig too. If that happens to work well, which I think it probably will, I just want to make sure it kicks both the power supplies on. I do have those 24-pin ATX splitters, so 1 motherboard, 2 power supplies on both of these, but I just want to make sure that the BIOS triggers both of the PSUs to start up, because I've had some issues with firing both smart plugs at once and the secondary not kicking on. Then the primary cards run without overclocks, and then they overheat, and this and that. So I'm going to try that a little bit, but yeah, yet another board swap in the bag. Well, I know I just talked about this thing, but a friend of mine locally saw that I was looking to trade my MSI Ventus 3X for an XC, and although I had to drive and get it and swap it out myself, I now have another Rev, I think this is a Rev 1, yeah, a Rev 1 3060 XC. So I'm going to place it in here, find all the tilt bracket stuff, and then get this rig looking like it should have always looked. Well, here we go.